Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today. So let me introduce myself. My name is Karthik Viswanatha. I'm a Salesforce MVP, and I'm also a Director of Development at OpFocus Inc. We are a consulting firm based out in Boston, and we do all kinds of consulting from Sales Cloud to Service Cloud to development projects as well. And you can also follow me on my Twitter handle. Unfortunately, it's not here, but it's @logontokarthik. So that's my Twitter handle. If you have been to the previous past Salesforce webinars, you might already know what this is. This is a forward-looking statement, or a safe harbor statement, as we call in the United States. Please do not make any buying decisions based on my webinar today. So if you wanted to purchase anything, make sure that you go through all the Salesforce stuff. And if you have any questions, go to salesforce.com and you'll find more information over there. Salesforce is social, and it is present on all different channels, from Twitter to Facebook to LinkedIn to YouTube. So if you are social as well, and if you wanted to follow Salesforce, make sure you register or you sign up to follow one of these social channels to get the latest and the greatest in around the Salesforce world. Today's agenda is fairly straightforward. I'll give you some introduction on the single sign-on, types of single sign-on, and then we'll jump straight into the OAuth and social authentication. I'm going to give a couple of demos of setting up the social authentication on the Salesforce using the standard Salesforce providers, and also using the OpenID Connect. Since identity is a huge topic in itself, identity and single sign-on, it might take like a day or like week to just go through like all these different topics. So today's session is more focused on the OAuth and social authentication, and all the other ones I'll briefly go through those. Prerequisites for this session are they should have audience should have like some good understanding of the platform concepts and basic understanding of authentication mechanisms, like what authentication means, what authorization means, and just basic understanding. And this webinar should get you started in going in that direction, where if you wanted to like build some authentication authorization mechanisms on the platform, this webinar will help you out. So without further ado, let's get started. SSO, or single sign-on. So what is single sign-on? I have an analogy. It's like you can pretty much unlock all the doors of your house using a single key, instead of having like multiple keys for each of the doors. That's exactly what single sign-on means, but in the technology terms, single sign-on is a process that allows the network users to access all authorized network resources without having to log in separately to each resource. It allows you to validate usernames and passwords against your corporate database or any other client application, rather than having separate user passwords managed by Salesforce or managed by any other identity provider. And the uses of the single sign-on are fairly straightforward. Again, is to reduce the administrative cost. It's an existing investment, and it increases the security and the user adoption. So if you want to change your password, you change it once, and it gets applied everywhere, and you don't have to worry about changing it in like 100 different places. And if you have been working in like any organization, a corporate organization, you might already be doing single sign-on, like using Windows or like any other mechanism, where you just have one username and password to access or log in to different applications within your corporate network. Basically, it is your one key to unlock any door. On the Salesforce side, there are 3 different types of single sign-on mechanisms that are most common. One is delegated authentication, federated authentication or SAML authentication, and the other one is OAuth. So those are the 3. So delegated authentication is a proprietary technology by Salesforce that allows users to enter their existing passwords. And Salesforce does not validate the user password, but what it does, it makes a web service call to the organization's established authentication credentials for that user. So it makes a web service call to a web server, like, or an identity server, and it establishes the authentication credentials for that user. SAML authentication, on the other hand, or like a federated authentication, it's a standards-based single sign-on solution. So SAML is used across all the different organizations, all different technologies. Uh, it's called Security Assertion Markup Language, an XML-based language. And SAML also, like delegated authentication, does not validate the user's password on the platform. Instead, it does a SAML assertion in a HTTP post request. And based on that assertion, it provides the identity for the user or grants access to the application for the user. And again, SAML and delegated authentication are their own concepts by itself. And maybe there will be like a different webinar or something that I'll be having. But today we are going to focus on the third one, which is OAuth or Open Authentication. Well, before jumping into OAuth or Open Authentication, so there's this really interesting wordings that I really found on the internet is SSO challenges the architects and integration experts to perhaps build the most complex integrations of their careers, and that's true because single sign-on is not easy. You have a lot of moving parts to the single sign-on. We have to build a lot of authorization servers. We have to build a lot of servers. We have to make sure that all the delegation between like the servers and the resources is going fine, and it directly impacts security. So it needs to be validated really good, tested really good. So single sign-on, building up a single sign-on mechanism is not easy, and it is a complex task. And fortunately, Salesforce, from the Salesforce standpoint, Salesforce takes care of a lot of that stuff for us. And also there are a lot of like vendors who provide various tools to do the single sign-on. But we are going to talk about a simpler fashion, not the SAML, not the delegated authentication, OAuth, which is an open standards protocol, which made a single sign-on process or the identity process much simpler. OAuth is an open standard token-based authentication, pretty much on the HTTP, and it uses account information, third-party services. It talks to like these different servers, and it does the authentication. It is, if you know how SAML works, it is fairly similar to how SAML works. I'm going to walk you through the process in a bit, but it's a straightforward process where you do the authorization, you get the code, and then you take the code and call the identity server, and then get the access token. Use the access token to basically access the resources on these servers or on the Salesforce side. Let's get into terminology a little bit, and then we'll dive into the details of how the OAuth works. So there are three main components or the parts for the OAuth. One is the resource server, and the resource server is the web server that you are trying to access the information on. It can be Salesforce, so a resource server can be a Salesforce. A client is how you are interacting with the resource server. And this could be your Chrome browser, or this could be your mobile app, or this could be your desktop app, or like any app. So that's the client. Client is where the user goes and he tries to access the resource server. And auth server or authorization server, this is the server that owns the user's identities and credentials. So this is where the actual authorization and access and all happens. And it is who the user actually authentication authorized with. So so these are the three main important components or the pieces for the OAuth terminology. And to compare it with the SAML process, this is like in SAML or like the federated authentication, authorization server is the identity provider, and the resource server is the service provider. So it is very much similar to the identity provider and the service provider. Let's jump onto the OAuth flow. So as we just talked about the resource server, the client, and the authorization server or identity provider. So the first step is the client requests the authorization. This is the flow, and I try to make it as simpler as possible. But the first step is client request authorization. So if you are on like a Salesforce, and if you're logging into like trying to do a connection, so you're on the Chrome browser and you're requesting authorization to the Salesforce uh, as a resource server. So this is what's going to happen. So the application redirects a user to the appropriate Salesforce authorization endpoint. And the endpoint, if you see the endpoint, it says OAuth to authorize. That's a very specific endpoint that you use to initiate the OAuth flow. And you provide the client ID and the redirect URL, and the code, which is basically response type is the code. And when the authorization is requested from the resource server will send the grant, authorization grant, to the client, and then client uses that grant to request the access token from the auth server or the authorization server. Again, this might be Salesforce in our case, this might be Facebook, this might be like Google Plus or anything, but what it does is it requests that access token. And then authorization server will validate or authorize that grant and the code, and then it will grant the access token to the client. So client will get the access token, and then the client will use that token, and then it will request the resource on the resource server. So resource can be like, get me the user info, or get me the account details, get me something else, like any information that is present on the resource server using that access token. And you can see that in Salesforce, you use a very specific endpoint, OAuth token, and you provide the grant types, the client ID, client secret, redirect array, and code, and you get the access token. When the resource server gets the access token request with the access token, what it does is it goes back to the auth server to make sure that the user identity attributes are validated. So authorization server make sure that the user identity is validated for that access token, and then it sends all the information that is required by the resource server. And the resource server sends the information back to the client. So that is basically the OAuth flow, and it is the most common flow, and all other types of OAuth flow follow this common flow. And anything that is built on top of the OAuth flow, like OpenID Connect, will also follow this OAuth flow. So it's always like a two-step process where you get the you request the authorization from the resource server. Resource server then sends a grant, and the grant is sent to the authorization server to get back the access token, and we use the access token to basically get the resources. The reason why I was like more emphasizing on the OAuth flow is because all this stuff is happening in the Salesforce. When I jump into the social authentication piece, all the stuff that's set up on the Salesforce is basically doing the same thing. And you'll be seeing like the callback URLs, the authorization URL, the access token URLs. And it is very important for as a person to understand this flow first before even jumping into like how it can be set up on the Salesforce side. So now let's dive into social authentication, which is a prime focus. What is social authentication? And the name implies it. As the name says, authenticate using any social profile. And why is this important? Because everyone has some kind of a social profile these days, and it would be much easier for them to use the social profile to authenticate or log in using into like any organization, especially Salesforce. So you can log in using your Facebook profile, you can log in using your Google profile or your LinkedIn profile. So authenticate using any social profile is very much important, and over the years it has emerged a lot that Salesforce is supporting all kinds of different kinds of social profiles authentications or auth providers. Why is it important? Again, as I said, it's a one-click, one username, password, more secure. There is a lot more data quality, so you don't have like duplicate users and all duplicate contacts created. Reliable sources. Yeah, when we say reliable sources, it's like Facebook is reliable, Google is reliable, and then the automation. So we don't have to manually start creating users or start provisioning users, and it can be automated in such a way that a user or a portal user or like a Salesforce internal user, if they have a social profile, we build the automation in such a way that we use that social profile to provision a user record in Salesforce and give them the right access or right permissions. Social authentication types. Currently, Salesforce supports different types of social authentication. Um, I'm going to talk about the OpenID Connect in a while, but Janrain is a third-party provider that will allow you to authenticate to Salesforce from any social network. We also have Microsoft Azure uh, profile, like Azure. I forgot the acronym, but Microsoft services where you can use Azure to connect to the Salesforce, and Salesforce also provides different custom ways of logging in from like Facebook or LinkedIn or Google, or even from Salesforce. If you have a multi-org strategy, if you're using multiple Salesforce orgs, and if you want to use one login to log into those multiple Salesforce orgs, you can use Salesforce as your IDP or like identity provider or authorization server. So let's jump into the demo, and we'll see how we're going to set up the social authentication, how we'll use a social authentication to log into Salesforce and create users. One of the first things that needs to be done in order to set up the social authentication is to enable the My Domain. So in order for you to enable the My Domain, you have to go to the setup, search for My Domain, and enable it here. If you don't have My Domain here, it will ask you for like what domain you want to use, and then there are multiple steps where you have to register your domain and then like click on save and then log in, and that will provide you this this nice custom URL for you to log in into Salesforce. And you can see that it's like web9dev.my.salesforce.com. So you can customize it, and that URL is very specific to you, so it is unique and it can be used just by you. So you have to make sure that My Domain is enabled before even like trying to create auth providers or doing the social authentication piece. So after the My Domain is enabled, if you search for auth providers, there is under the security controls, you can see a list of all the auth providers, and you can create a new auth provider here. So let's look at the Facebook example. So what we're going to do today is we're going to create an auth provider and use Facebook as our social authentication mechanism. So Facebook will be our IDP or like authorization server that will provide us the information for any Facebook profile to log in into Salesforce. So if you click on new, you can see the provider types. So yeah, now I remember Microsoft is called Access Control Service. Well, anyways, you click on the provider type, and you can see all these different providers that are already pre-packaged for us or pre-built for us. Facebook, Janrain, Salesforce, OpenID Connect, Microsoft ACS, LinkedIn, Twitter, Google, and GitHub. Let's look at Facebook. So as soon as you choose Facebook, it will ask you some details about what needs to be provided to enable this auth provider or to enable the social login. So the name, we can give any name. The URL suffix. URL suffix is important because based on the URL suffix, you will be getting very specific endpoints. So it is very important for us to like provide a nice URL suffix. And the consumer key and the consumer secret. In order for us to get the Facebook's consumer key and consumer secret, we have to navigate to developers.facebook.com. And I'm already here. So if you go to the developer.facebook.com, you can create an app. So when you click on the create new app, it will ask you different questions like simple, straightforward, wizard style questions. And when you are here, dashboard, you can see the app ID and the app secret. That is the consumer key and the consumer secret. So here you need to put the consumer key and the consumer secret, and everything else is pre-populated for you. Because we chose very specific Facebook as auth provider, so the endpoint URLs, you can see those are already defined for the Facebook. And rest all we can leave not failed. I'll come into the registration handler in a while, but let me show you the one that I already created. So auth provider, the provider type is Facebook, the name is Facebook, URL suffix is Facebook, and I have a registration handle custom, and then I have some icons that I want to show. And you can see all these different configuration variables that are auto-populated when you define this auth provider. Let's look at, and as I said, for the URL suffix, so when you define the suffix, all these suffix are appended to your URL. So you can see all this OAuth initiation URL, callback URL. We need to take this callback URL, copy this callback URL, and make sure that within the settings, we put this callback URL as the site URL. This is an important step that is generally like forgotten, but this needs to happen. Otherwise, the Facebook authentication will not work. So we need to make sure that we update this one based on the URL that we get. And if you wanted to test your scenarios, and if you wanted to test your stuff, so we take the test only URL and then paste it here. And what it is gonna do is it is gonna return you all this nice XML with the links and the user information. So, and like the Facebook ID, the portal ID, and locale, and first name, email address, well, these are all my details. So please do not copy any of my details. But you get all this information. And that's to make sure that you are able to successfully connect to the Facebook, and you are able to successfully return back, say Facebook is successfully returning back all the information that is needed for you to log into Salesforce. The next thing, after you set up the auth provider, the next thing that you need to do is you need to go back to your My Domain and edit your authentication configuration to turn on the Facebook. So if you now log in, if you try to log in now, let me log out and see. Oh yeah, I logged out. You can see that there is this regular Salesforce login username password screen, and at the bottom you can see or login using Facebook. We'll come to Salesforce again, but let's focus on the Facebook. And when you click on the Facebook, what it is gonna do is it is gonna log you in. Well, actually, it skipped few steps, but I'll explain you what those few steps are. It is gonna first give you an option to allow access. If you're already logged into Facebook, what it will do is it will ask you whether to allow access for Salesforce to access your information from Facebook or not. And if you click on the allow access, that is when it returns back the information, your user information from Facebook, and sends it into Salesforce. And if you are not logged in, it will ask you for login to Facebook. So you log in into Facebook, and then it will show up this allow access screen. And when the information is sent to Salesforce, that is when Salesforce needs to do something with that information. And what it needs to do is it needs to do a just-in-time provisioning, or what we call as a JIT. For the just-in-time provisioning, we have something called as a registration handler. If you have noticed it, let me log out. Let me log in as an admin. So if I look for auth provider, I look at the Facebook, you can see there is this option called as registration handler, which is nothing but an Apex class. And what this Apex class is doing is it is taking in the information that Facebook is sending into Salesforce, and it is creating a user record based on that information. or updating a user record. And we call this one as just in time because we are pretty much like in time creating the user record. Let's look at the class, what it is doing, and so this is an Apex class, and it needs to implement auth.registration handler interface. And it is very important, if you do not implement this auth.registration handler interface, you'll not be able to choose or select that class in the auth providers option. And with the auth.registration handler interface, you get like two methods that you need to implement. One is create user, and another one is update user. Create user, as the name implies, you create a new user record with the information that you get. And update user, as the name implies, that if a user is logging in with the same credentials and if he is already there in the system, just update the user. So you can do all kinds of logic here. I'll walk you through the logic that I have created. So this is the create user, and it takes in the information like a portal ID and auth.userdata.data. Portal ID is useful if you are accessing or if you are exposing your social authentication through communities. That is when the portal ID will come into picture. Since we did not expose it to communities yet, so this one is all internal. Portal ID will be null. So we don't really care about the portal ID at this point. But if that's this else part, so what is happening is on the else side, all we are doing is we are assigning a standard user profile for anyone who is logging in through Facebook, and then creating the user record. So create user, which is nothing but it is just creating a user record using Apex and assigning the profile. There are some things that I have done, like org suffix is web9.dev.org, and then the default account name is sports. So if I look at the user that got created, so you can see the username is Facebook username .web9.dev.org, and the profile is standard user. So think about scenarios where you want to allow anybody who is logging through Facebook to create a user who is a standard user or a system user, or maybe you have your custom Facebook profile in Salesforce. You define a Facebook profile, and then like you assign that Facebook profile for anyone who is logging in through Facebook. So that's the concept of registration handler and how you enable Facebook as your social authentication provider to log into Salesforce. We can also do the same thing for the portal. Let me see if I can. In order for you to enable the social authentication for the portal or for the portal users or communities, which is communities, you go to communities. Hopefully I have communities here. Okay. Well, this might take a long, but you go to the communities, and within the communities under the administration, you have option to select different social authentication mechanisms. So hopefully I'll be able to create the community quickly, but it's the same process, but the only difference is in the registration handler, because for a community user, you need to have an associated account defined, and you need to have like a contact defined. And so within the registration handler, you define all those stuff. So if I go to administration, and if I click on login, you can see select which login options to display, and you can see Facebook as one of the options, because that's there as an auth provider. Hopefully it is active. Wow, that's fast. So if I take this, I should log out. Well, that's the beauty of live demos. So it's the process is still the same. So you use or maybe let me try using incognito. See, yeah, so incognito wonder worked. So you can see login using the Facebook. If I click on the Facebook, it takes me to the Facebook, and put in my username, password. Oops. Oh, I know why. So that's why it's like live demos, it's hard. I have to make sure. Okay. Hopefully this one will work. Oh. So this is the last time I'm trying, so I'm not going to try again. Community setup is like a complex one, and I know I need to like make sure that I set up a lot of things on the community, but you understand the concept. So the concept is the same. We just need to make sure that we choose the auth provider that we defined in the community login access as well. So let me go back to my presentation. So we did the Facebook application. That is, we defined the auth provider in Salesforce org. We updated the Facebook application with the callback URL generated by Salesforce. We did a test connection. We created a registration handler, and we did a single sign-on. So that's Facebook. So the next topic, or the next demo that I wanted to show you is little on the identity OpenID Connect. OpenID Connect, to give you a definition of what OpenID Connect is, OpenID Connect, it's an interoperable authentication protocol that is loosely based on the OAuth family of specifications. It uses the straightforward REST-based JSON messaging flows with a design goal of making simple things simple and complicated things possible. So that is basically what OpenID Connect is. So this standard came in like in 2014, so it's only 2 years since this was published, but it has seen a lot of traction from like a lot of big tech companies like Google and Microsoft, and also Salesforce.com. So Salesforce identity, what it does is it uses OpenID Connect to authenticate the users across and the providers, and it reduces the number of passwords and other credentials. Why? So there was like always a question why we needed OpenID Connect. Why not just use the OAuth authentication? It clearly defines. So the main difference between OAuth and OpenID Connect is that it clearly defines, or it sets that gap or bridge between what can be done from the user authentication standpoint. So OAuth is it's a very powerful feature where you can access like any resource as soon when you have access to it. So when you get an access token, you can literally access any resource in the system, and then you don't even know what server it is coming in from. So you can use a totally different application using the access token, and you can access it. Versus the OpenID Connect, what it does is it provides the restrictions. It will only give access to the user ID profile, user profiles, and it sends JWT tokens or JSON Web Tokens that are more secure and encrypted, so you exactly know who the user is and what information that is provided from the authorization server. So it's more secure. So that's the reason why everyone started using OpenID Connect. And if you see the diagram, the process is the same as the OAuth. So it's fairly straight. It's fairly same as the OAuth, where you can see that you see OpenID provider. It's nothing but the auth server, as in OAuth. So we are going to demo the OpenID Connect. Or what we are going to do is we are going to set up a Salesforce login. So what I'm going to show you is you can connect using Salesforce. So if you have multiple organizations, you can use one Salesforce or organization's login to connect to different organizations. So it is very useful if you have a multi-org strategy, or if you have implemented like the multiple organizations within your org, and then you can use one login to connect to like this different Salesforce instances. So again, the process is the same. So we navigate to auth providers. So we click on the new and we choose. So I'm not choosing Salesforce. Salesforce is already predefined. I'm not choosing that. I'm using OpenID Connect. So as I said, OpenID Connect is more generic, so you can use OpenID Connect with anything. And you can see like all this different information. Name would be a Salesforce. URL suffix would be URL suffix that will get appended to all these different URLs that are populated. Consumer key and consumer secret. If you are trying to access, if you're trying to set up Salesforce as your auth provider, the way you get the consumer key and consumer secret is through connected apps. So so we need to define a connected app within Salesforce. And then you need to define all this detail, put in all these details, and that's where you get the consumer key and the consumer secret from. So once you get the consumer key and consumer secret, put in the consumer key and consumer secret. Authorization endpoint URL is login.salesforce.com/OAuth/authorize, and token endpoint URL is /token. This one is new, so this one will not be present for like a basic OAuth. So the user info endpoint URL is the one that is very specific to the OpenID Connect. This one will tell us which endpoint to call to get the user information, and that will provide you the user information that is required for you to authenticate or login. We can leave the other ones defaults, like the default scopes and everything else defaults. And again, we have a registration handler that we use to do JIT or just-in-time provisioning. Let's see the one that I already created. So I have the consumer key, consumer secret, authorization endpoint, as I said, it's authorized, token, and then user info is user info. So I'm sending the access tokens in header. And I have another Apex class called social registration handler that does pretty much the same thing. So let's look at the class. Okay. It does implement the auth registration handler interface. So we have to make sure that we have all the we have the create user and update user methods, and then we have to make sure that if it is used within the community, account is defined, contact is defined. If not, just create the user using the standard profile. It's the same thing as you saw on the Facebook side. So it depends on your company's needs. If you want to have multiple registration handler classes to do multiple things for each of the social authentication providers, you can have multiple ones. Or if you want to have just one generic one that takes care of all the auth providers, you can have just one and then reference it like in all these different auth providers that you're creating. So let's test it out. Well, I think I ran out of licenses, so I need to make sure that I turn off one. So with the DevOps, you get only two licenses. Yes, before testing this one out, again, the same process. When you define the auth provider, you get the callback URL. Make sure that you take the callback URL and update it in your callback URL on the connected app. This is a very important step, and if not, you'll be getting some error saying that the callback URL is not valid or it is mismatching. So hopefully, so now you can see that we have two logins. So I can click on Salesforce. So I'm going to use my success community profile. If I remember my password. Oh, I hate it when it sends the verification codes sometimes. So, 78178. Okay. So you can see that now we got this option. So in the Facebook, then we didn't get this option because I already clicked on the allow access. But you can see this option where Salesforce SO, which is nothing but our connected app, it is asking us to get the basic information and access the unique identifier. Let's click on allow and see what's going to happen. Well, so it created a user and it logged me into the Salesforce org. So right now I'm logged into Salesforce org as a standard user, and I can, let's see what, well, my standard user have all access. So you can see this is the new user that just got created, like just now, literally. And you can see all the username passwords. Well, the username is set based on the definitions on in my code. It says this is the one. Well, that's my username. So yeah, so that's how it created did a just-in-time provisioning for my social authentication using Salesforce. So let's. So we used OpenID Connect. We pointed to a connected app in Salesforce. We built a registration handling for just-in-time provisioning. We did not set up committed learning page. I did not do that, so I tried doing that. I need to make sure that it is already set up before. So live demos, wonderful. So that's pretty much on the social authentication. The process is fairly same for any other auth provider. So we walk through what an OAuth is. We defined what an SSO, a single sign-on, is, and I just gave a brief intro on what types of single sign-on Salesforce provides, and then I jumped into the OAuth. I walk you through the OAuth flow, and then we jumped into the social authentication, and I gave two demos, one on the Facebook and one on the Salesforce. The process is fairly straightforward, similar for all the other types of social auth providers like Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, or any other provider, or any other provider that you have that has the ability to do the OpenID Connect. So it's all the same. So that's pretty much the end of my session. So we learned all these different things. So I have some resources that you'll be getting this slide deck within a week or so. So you can go through these different resources. And Trailhead, make sure that you get some badges on the Trailhead if you did not already. So Trailhead, for the people who does not know what Trailhead is an interactive learning platform by Salesforce. It is free of cost, and it is awesome, and it's a fun way to learn Salesforce. So there are three different badges that I would recommend. One is the INT basics, the user authentication, and mobile basics, because it talks a little bit about like the authentication mobile as well. So make sure that you get those. And so now it's time for the Q&A. Now, as we promised, we have some chance to cover some questions today, and if you are out of time, we'll make sure that we cover all your questions. So the first question is on the auth flow. There's a question. So can the auth server be Salesforce itself? Can we rely on Salesforce credentials in lieu of Facebook, Twitter, etc.? Yes. Auth server can be Salesforce itself as well, because Salesforce has user credentials, and most of the times, especially in like multiple orgs in the companies that have multiple Salesforce instances, it is kind of difficult to manage multiple usernames. Like tons of, if they have like 5 different instances, every user cannot have like 5 different usernames to log into those. So a single sign-on strategy, or like a social sign-on strategy, would be to use one Salesforce login and log in into all these different orgs. So in that case, the auth server or the identity provider is Salesforce itself, and it will make sure that it passes in the user info and all that is required and does all these authentication mechanisms. And yes, we can definitely rely on Salesforce credentials, unless you are using a developer org. I mean, developer there. I don't recommend using a DevOps to log in into like the production instances. But yes, we can definitely rely on the Salesforce credentials. What is the prerequisite to learn and practice OAuth and SAML? Well, I don't think there is like a strong prerequisite or anything. I mean, there is a lot of documentation on the Salesforce website, like developer.salesforce.com, that will get you started with the SAML and OAuth. OAuth is much simpler to understand and learn and practice because it is an open protocol and there are many tools and resources externally that will help you in learning the OAuth. SAML is also a straightforward, I mean, it's not really straightforward, but a set standard across different industries and different like technologies. But SAML uses XML, and there are some concepts that you need to learn through to understand how it works. Again, if you compare and contrast the OAuth and SAML, they are pretty much the same. It's just the terminology that differs. So yeah, I mean, I would say go to the developer.salesforce.com website and start learning there, or even get started on the Trailhead. Is there a means to skin theme brand Salesforce OAuth bumper screen? That's an interesting question. I mean, like, you can brand it. I mean, you can have your own logo. You can have different logos for your social logins, and you can change the background color of your login screen. And also I think on the right side, whatever you want to display. If you go to my domain, and you can see all these different options there. If it is a communities page or the portal page that you are accessing, you can pretty much like completely change the look and feel of your login page on the communities. So the next question, is there a way to connect an existing Salesforce user with his social media logins? That's a very interesting question. So in order, so the way I would think of doing that one is using the registration handler classes. So if what I would be doing is I would be creating like the custom fields on the user object that will have IDs for like each of their social logins, like a Facebook ID, a Google ID, or like a Twitter ID or some IDs, unique identifiers. And when they log in using their social media login, what I'll do is I'll update within the registration handler. I'll be updating those IDs in the custom fields, and every time they log in, I will check to see if it is already created, and if that ID is present on any user record. I'll just keep on updating it. So I think that's a way I could think of connecting the existing Salesforce users. For the community user, it is a little different because you need to create like contacts and do it on the contact records. How is the Apex class created? You can auto create or auto generate an Apex class, like a stub is created with like a very default instructions within it, like our default code in it. But my Apex class, it's all modified. It's all customized. I'll post the links onto my presentation so that you can take a look at it on my GitHub repo. Let's see. So let's see if, so all the demos that I gave today are on the developer org. So you can you spin up your own developer org, and you can play around. So you can practice in within your developer org as well. So it's not a production org; it's all in the developer org. So this is a very interesting question: is if you use a third-party authentication provider, how does that provider know that the user continues to be authorized? That is, if you let an employee authenticate via Facebook, how will Facebook know when the employee is terminated? Well, the Facebook will not know when the employee is terminated, because Facebook is like their own personal social profile. So it is as an admin or as a representative of your organization, you need to make sure that you manage that part within Salesforce. You can have like many creative ways of doing that. As I said, you can use your own registration handler to manage that, where like you can say, so you have your own employees database, and if an employee is terminated from the database, you sync that database to your user data in Salesforce. And if that user who is terminated is trying to access Salesforce using a Facebook profile, you pretty much say that this employee is terminated. You cannot really like give them access and throw them an error message or something. So there are creative ways of doing that. So it's not limited. So Facebook does not know that. So Facebook does not restrict you, or you can like restrict the app pretty much. But Facebook will not take care of that for you. So I think we're almost out of time. So I'll take one more question before I conclude. And if I do not get to any of your questions, we'll make sure that those questions are answered and posted on the webinar page on the developer.salesforce.com. So one more last question. Can we rely on social authentication for users that opt for it, have a profile, but also offer social authentication for those that don't? It's again a very good question, and again, so the answer would be yes. We can not rely on social authentication, but we have to make sure that we build logic within our Salesforce org, so that we restrict the users, or we give access to the users who can do social authentication or who cannot do social authentication. So it all depends on the setup and configuration that you do within the Salesforce. So you need to make two things working together: your admin configuration and also the auth provider social authentication piece. To a last comment, or like a comment that I have noticed from my experience for the social authentication is, most of the times the social authentication is primarily used for communities. So if you build a community, a customer community or a partner community, and if you wanted to allow your partners or your customers to log into that community, that is when social authentication can be used in conjunction with like all this like different authentication, because you don't have to worry about registering all your customers into like the community. They can use their social profile to register and do auto registrations and all. We can do that for the internal users as well, but that depends. There are many factors that are going to impact the internal user social authentication mechanisms. So that's my experience, and with that note, I pretty much conclude today's webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us today. If we did not get to any of your specific questions, please, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or post questions on the forums, or we'll get back to you in various ways possible. Thank you all, and you all have a wonderful day.